Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. I live in California, and back then I used to camp a lot, like at least once or twice a month if I could get the time. I'm not a hardcore backpacker or anything like that. I just like the peace of getting out into nature. I had this cheap little tent, a decent sleeping bag, and I usually went to smaller campgrounds that didn't get too busy. I wasn't doing it for the social scene. I like the quiet, that's all. Anyway, this happened late September. I remember that because it was getting colder and I had just bought this new camp stove, I was kind of excited to try. I took a couple days off work, packed up my gear, and drove out to this spot I'd never been to before. I had found it on a forum where people shared quieter spots. It was honestly perfect. Way quieter than other sites I'd stayed at before. Just a handful of other cars in the gravel parking area when I got there, and they all looked like serious hikers. No music, no groups of drunk college kids or anything like that. Just the wind and the trees and that clean forest smell. I picked a site a little further from the others. It wasn't totally isolated, but it was tucked away down this short trail off the main loop. Not far enough that I couldn't get help if something happened, but far enough that I wouldn't hear people talking or whatever. By the time I got everything set up, it was late afternoon. I strung up my food bag, bears in the area apparently, set up my camp chair by the fire pit, and got my little stove going to heat some water for instant coffee. It was already getting chilly and the sun was dipping low through the trees. I lit the fire just after sunset. I remember watching the flames catch and thinking, damn, this is exactly what I needed. I sat back with my coffee, wrapped in a flannel, just letting myself relax. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Leaves crunching, slow, like someone trying not to make a sound. I turned around and there was this guy standing just beyond the tree line, holding a bundle of firewood. He was maybe mid-40s, average build, wearing old jeans and a brown hoodie. His beard was kind of patchy, and his eyes were hard to read in the dim light. He gave this weird little grin and said, "Figured you could use more wood." It startled me. I hadn't heard him come up at all before that. I didn't even know there were other people near me. I kind of laughed awkwardly and said, thanks, but I've got enough for tonight." He didn't move, just stood there with the wood in his arms. Then he said, "Mind if I sit for a bit?" I don't like being rude, but something felt off. I said, "I was just about to eat and turn in early. Big hike tomorrow." It was a lie. I hadn't real plans. I just wanted him to go away. He nodded, kind of slow, like he was thinking about something. Then he said, "All right then." He turned and walked back into the woods, but he didn't go far. I watched him step maybe 15 feet away, then just stand there, half in shadow, half in the light of the fire, holding the firewood still, not saying anything, not moving. I waited, trying to play it cool. I started cooking my little freeze-dried dinner, pretending I didn't see him. But he stayed, just stood there, watching. After like 10 minutes, I said, "Hey, you all right?" No answer. He just stared. My stomach dropped a little. I wasn't armed, just had a little folding knife, but nothing that would help if he rushed me or something. I started going through my options in my head. Should I pack up and leave? Go to another site? But then what if he followed me? The whole time he didn't move. Just stood at the edge of the trees like he was waiting for something. I tried to ignore it and just eat, but my hands were shaking. I dropped my fork at one point, and that sound of it hitting the metal of my pot made me jump. Eventually, I stood up and said, "I think it's best if you leave. I'm not comfortable with you just standing there." Still nothing. No words. He finally turned and walked a bit deeper into the woods. I couldn't see him anymore, but I could hear him. Sticks snapping, leaves crunching. Still close. still nearby. That whole night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire until it burned low. Then I just sat in my tent, knife in hand, every single noise making my heart race. I'd hear twigs snap, then silence, then footsteps, then silence again. Sometime around 2 a.m., I thought I saw a shadow pass by the front of my tent, just a quick movement like someone crouching low. I held my breath for what felt like a full minute. Nothing. I didn't dare look outside. I just sat there, frozen, until the sun finally started to come up. As soon as there was light, I threw my gear into my bag, didn't even pack it right. Just stuffed everything in. I poured what was left of my water on the fire and bolted for the trail that led back to the parking lot. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him behind me, but I didn't. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I got to the ranger station near the entrance, I told them what happened. The ranger looked concerned. He asked for a description and said they'd send someone to check. About an hour later, as I was still sitting there trying to calm down, a second ranger came in and told me they'd found him. He'd moved to another site, not a designated one, just kind of lurking behind some trees near a group of teenagers who had arrived that morning. According to the ranger, he'd been watching them too. They approached him and he acted like nothing was weird. They escorted him out and banned him permanently from the grounds. Said it wasn't the first time they'd had complaints about someone matching his description, but he always left before they could catch him doing anything illegal. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he was dangerous or just off, but I can tell you I've never felt that kind of fear before. The way he watched me. I've gone on day hikes since then, but I haven't camped overnight since. Not alone. Probably not ever again. So this happened last summer. My cousin Danny and I are pretty close. He's 14 and I'm a few years older. So we've always hung out, gotten into trouble, and done our fair share of random weekend trips. Last summer, we decided to go camping in this quiet, somewhat remote state park in California. It's one of those places where cell service disappears the moment you turn off the highway, and the nearest town is about an hour away. We like the idea of being alone for a weekend, just the two of us, to get away from everything. So we pack up a small tent, some gear, and head out. We set up camp near a stream, and it's so peaceful there. We fish for a while. I actually caught a pretty decent one, which I felt pretty proud about, and after cleaning it, we roasted it over the fire. The sun was starting to set, the temperature dropped just a little, and the whole place had this perfect, serene vibe to it. Birds were quieting down, and the only thing we could hear was the crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. We're just talking and laughing, trying to enjoy the calm, when Danny says he sees something weird by the trees. Now, I figured it was just some shadow or a trick of the light, but he gets a little weirded out. He tells me he saw what looked like a guy standing back in the trees, like just a shadow, but he couldn't make out much more than that. I didn't think too much of it. Maybe it was a tree or some wildlife moving around, but I could tell Danny was a little freaked out. So we decide to just brush it off. Night falls and the moon is high in the sky. We're still sitting by the fire, poking it with sticks, talking about random stuff when suddenly a guy walks into our campsite. I didn't even hear him approach, but out of nowhere, this man just steps right up to the edge of our firelight. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, but his clothes were filthy, like he'd been out in the woods for days. He steps forward into the firelight, looking around nervously for a moment. Then, with his voice shaky and a little too casual, he says, "Hey, you guys got any water? I've been hiking all day and just need a quick drink." His hands trembled slightly as he held them out. I gave him a bottle of water because, I don't know, you don't turn someone down when they ask for something as simple as that, especially when you're out in the middle of nowhere. But as I handed it to him, I noticed he was staring at Danny. I mean, really staring at him. Like, I've never seen someone look at another person like that before. It wasn't a, oh, hey, nice to meet you look. It was weird. But he thanked us, and then, without saying another word, he walked off into the woods. We didn't think much of it after that. We went into the tent, zipped it up, and tried to get some sleep. By the time midnight rolled around, the fire had burned down to just a few embers. It was so still, too still. And it was then that we heard something. Footsteps, like crunching leaves coming from the woods. At first, I thought it was an animal or maybe a deer. But then the footsteps stopped right outside our campsite. I thought it was weird, but Danny was the first to say something. He whispered, "That's the guy, the one who asked for water." And I swear to God, as soon as he said that, I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't thought about it much, but now that he mentioned it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I peeked outside the tent just enough to see, and there he was again. The same guy, standing just beyond the firelight. This time he wasn't holding anything, and his clothes were even dirtier than before. His hands were shaking harder, and he asked, in this strange, urgent way, if we could help him find his flashlight. He said he'd lost it somewhere in the woods. His voice sounded like he was trying too hard to sound casual, but there was something wrong in his tone. Almost like he wasn't just asking, but expecting us to go with him. Danny looked over at me, and I could see he was starting to get really nervous. I don't blame him. There was something off about this guy, but I didn't want to seem rude or dismissive. I told the man that we could radio the Rangers if he needed help, but he kept pushing. He insisted, his voice growing a little more insistent, almost demanding, that we come with him to look for it. He kept saying it would only take a few minutes. I don't know why, but I stepped between him and Danny, trying to make it clear we weren't going anywhere. That's when the man's face twisted a bit, like he was annoyed or frustrated. The smile he gave us was wrong. I can't even explain why it was wrong, it just was. After a long pause, he muttered something under his breath, something I couldn't quite make out, and turned around, disappearing back into the trees without another word. We stayed in the tent, quiet as hell. We didn't say much to each other, but we both knew something was off. We radioed the Rangers, and after what felt like forever, we finally heard them come on the radio. They said they'd be on their way, but until then, just stay inside the tent, lock everything up, and keep the fire going. For the next hour, we heard him. The man, walking around the campsite, his footsteps crunching through the leaves. I could swear I heard him whispering something, low and barely audible, but just loud enough to make me wonder what he was saying. When the Rangers arrived at dawn, they didn't even have to ask much. They just nodded, said they knew exactly who we were talking about, and started getting us packed up. As we were leaving, one of them told us that a man matching the description had been living in the woods for weeks, harassing campers. They'd had complaints from several families about him trying to lure them away from their campsites. The last thing the ranger told us was that we did the right thing by not going with him. They said he was dangerous. They didn't elaborate more than that, but we didn't need them to. We never saw that guy again. But every now and then I still wonder what would have happened if we'd given him that help he was asking for. I think about it a lot, especially when I'm out in the woods. It's crazy how easily a simple request could turn into something so messed up. I've spent a lot of time alone, camping in some pretty remote places, away from the crowds. The idea of peace and quiet, with just the wind in the trees and the crackle of a campfire, that's always been my idea of a perfect night. It's why I decided to head out to Central California for a solo camping trip last summer. I had rented an RV for the weekend, thinking it would be a nice way to escape the grind and just disconnect for a bit. This wasn't my first time camping out in the middle of nowhere, but this time was different. I decided to head to an area I'd never been to before, a spot I found online, tucked away near a dried-up riverbed, way off the beaten path. It was perfect, isolated, quiet, and about as far from other people as you could get. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, casting that warm, golden glow over everything. I pulled the RV off the small dirt road and onto the cleared-out camping area. It was so remote that I wasn't worried about anyone else showing up. There were no other campers in sight. There was just me, the RV, and the sound of the wind rustling through the dry trees. I set up my camp as the sun began to set, unrolling a small mat outside the RV to sit on. I started a small fire in a metal pit, but the fire wasn't really necessary. It was mostly for ambiance. I grabbed my journal and started writing by the dim light of a lantern, enjoying the quiet. The air was dry, and the night sky was already beginning to fill with stars. I was content, completely at ease, and felt totally alone. For the first time in a long time, I could actually hear my thoughts. The world felt so still, and I was almost drifting off to sleep in that half-conscious state when the wind picked up. It had a way of howling through the trees, bending them slightly, making a noise that was almost like whispers. I shut the journal and went inside the RV, locking the door behind me. I figured I'd head to bed soon. The lantern went out with a soft hiss, and I settled in, feeling cozy with my blankets and pillows. It was still pretty early, maybe just around 10 p.m., but the exhaustion from the drive and the peacefulness of the evening had me slipping into a deep sleep. It was well past midnight when I woke up, wide awake, heart pounding for no reason. I was in that half-sleep, half-wake state, unsure of where I was for a few seconds. Then I heard it, a faint scraping sound. It wasn't loud, more like something rubbing against the side of the RV. I tried to brush it off as an animal, maybe a raccoon or a possum. But then it came again, closer this time. The sound was slow, deliberate, almost methodical. Something was moving out there. I held my breath, straining my ears. The silence after the scraping was oppressive. Then, just as I was starting to convince myself it was nothing, I heard the unmistakable sound of the RV's door handle. It wasn't a simple jingle like you'd hear from an animal trying to get inside. It was a slow, deliberate turn of the handle, like someone trying to get in. My heart nearly stopped. Whoever it was didn't seem to be in a rush. They were taking their time, trying to be quiet. I was frozen. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I wanted to grab my phone, but it was on the table a few feet away. I couldn't move without making noise. I stayed completely still, hoping whatever was outside would just go away. But then something even worse happened. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy footsteps moving toward the back of the RV. I dared a quick glance through the blinds. I didn't see anyone, but the sound of tapping against the back window froze me in place. It wasn't random tapping either. It was rhythmic, almost like something was trying to pry open the window. I couldn't tell what it was, but the tapping was like a screwdriver or something metal scraping against the glass, slow, persistent, and unnerving. Then the breathing started. It wasn't loud at first, but it was there. Ragged, labored breathing, like someone was standing right outside, listening. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, every muscle in my body locked in fear. I don't know how long I stayed like that, just lying there, trying to keep my breathing steady, praying that whoever it was wouldn't try the door again. My mind kept racing with 100 different thoughts. Should I call the cops? Should I go out and confront them? But then I remembered the hatchet I had in the drawer next to my bed. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. With my hand trembling, I reached over and grabbed the key fob to my RV. My heart pounded as I pressed the panic button. The sudden blare of the RV's alarm was deafening. The lights flashed on, lighting up the entire campsite in a cold, harsh glow. The silence outside was shattered by the sound of the alarm, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. But then, through the blinds, I saw something, a figure darting toward the trees at the edge of the clearing. I couldn't see their face, but they were tall, wearing a dark hooded jacket, and they moved fast, disappearing into the shadows. My heart was still pounding, but I immediately called the sheriff's department. I wasn't sure if the figure had seen me or if they'd run because the alarm had startled them, but either way, I wasn't about to take any chances. I waited in the RV, clutching that camping hatchet like it would somehow protect me. The minutes stretched on forever as I stared out the windows, waiting for the police to arrive. When they finally did, I was shaking, barely able to speak. I told them what had happened, about the scraping, the breathing, the figure outside, and they took my statement, though I could see in their eyes that they weren't sure what to make of it. They told me they'd patrol the area, but they didn't seem hopeful about catching whoever it was. By morning, the deputies had confirmed something even worse. There were other campsites in the area that had been targeted as well. One of them had slashed tires, and others had signs of forced entry attempts, scratched locks, pried open windows. It was clear someone had been going around the area looking for easy targets. But the worst part was that they didn't catch anyone. The guy, or guys, had slipped away unnoticed. What really gets to me, though, is the realization that I wasn't just lucky the alarm scared him off. No, I was lucky I woke up at all. If I hadn't heard the scraping, the breathing, who knows what would have happened. The whole experience haunts me now, and I'll never camp alone in a remote area like that again. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.